Good morning, people. This is a really good webinar that we're going to have. We have it every year. It's the winner of the AQR Qualitative Excellence Award. And this year, the winner is Steph, who is going to kick off in a minute. But first of all, we're going to have Simon Patterson, who is going to introduce what Qualitative Excellence Award is and a bit of history. So Simon, over to you.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining on this cold day. I think everyone knows that the AQR Qualitative Excellence Award is a really important award for qualitative research, and Steph here is the 21st winner, so 21 is a very important date. We've been running the award since 2003. It was originally called the Prosper Riley Smith Award, some of you may remember. And the award itself, the trophy, is still called the Prosper. And this coveted award is also accompanied by £1,000, which Steph will have won. I think the great thing about the award is that we've got the support of other associations, particularly the MRS, and it's awarded, as you probably know, at the MRS Awards dinner in December. And we also have representatives of Aura, who are very supportive, and SMR, and also this year we had qual and AMSAR. So it's an industry recognized award. It's very prestigious, and we're really pleased that Steph won 2023, I was going to say 2030. And we encourage people to sign up for next year or this year's, which will be in July. So I think that's it, really.
Okay. Well, first off, I think I'll read out a couple of the judges' comments, which were pretty amazing. One of them was the Reinventing Ollie case study stood out this year as a great example of how insightful qual can successfully help a brand evolve and reinvent itself. And another one said it delivered iterative insights at each stage, building as it went, depths and going beyond the obvious. So with that in mind, Steph, what did it mean to you to actually win it?
I think I'm not often put in for awards because you sort of get wound up in the time. So I really like the AQR award because it's sort of, I feel like it's by researchers for researchers, and it's really nice to have validation that what you're doing is okay. Sometimes when we're working, you sort of go, is this good? Is it not good? So I think even writing the award was quite helpful, just to get your thoughts down, to see the sort of methodologies you're doing, and then winning it was just brilliant. The night the awards dinner was brilliant as well. So yeah, really, really surprising, but great.
Oh, that's good news. So Steph is going to take us through her presentation. I'm going to interject with a few questions along the way. If you have any questions, if you'd like to wing them in, but we'll address them at the end. And I'm never entirely sure whether Q&A and chat is going to work. I know Q&A is, so whichever. Okay, Steph, over to you.
Brilliant. Well, I'll share some slides, but please just interject, Luella, as and when, if I've forgotten to say something. So I think the essence of this award, obviously it's the AQR, it's about qualitative research. And I think sometimes qualitative research gets a bit forgotten because you need numbers and confidence and everything. So I'm hoping that this study shows that actually by using a combination of qualitative research methods, you can really get a compelling solution to problems or a compelling argument for clients. So it is a mixed methodology study. I'm really passionate about mixed methodology studies. probably about half of the work I do a mixed methodology. And I don't just mean a piece of qual followed by quant validation. I mean a combination of qualitative approaches that get to a better result. So really, I've got a couple of slides around why mixed methodology I think are so powerful, but also can be quite challenging to get away. And then the study really is an example of a mixed methodology study.
And do you ever use just one methodology?
Yes, I do, because sometimes the needs are there. I have got a slide where I'll sort of highlight the difference between, I think, for me, the difference between the two and when it's most appropriate. But I think there are more opportunities to use mixed methodology than briefs would allow, if that makes sense. So I think there's a lot more occasions where a mixed methodology study would add real weight and power and impact. So I think that's what I'm trying to get across, that I think there are brilliant occasions to use it, and it's not as daunting maybe as it would seem. I think on that's the thing I wanted to start with is I go on about mixed methodology studies. I do them all the time because I think they are really powerful. I'm sort of the person that needs to see the whole picture. I need to learn lots. I need real understanding in order to convince someone to change. And I think mixed methodology studies allow you to do that. I think the challenge with them is there is a perception, sometimes with the researcher, sometimes with the client, that actually they're really costly, they're really complex, they're time consuming. They can be a bit overwhelming because so much data can be coming in from lots of different angles. A lot of people are unfamiliar with the different methodologies. So there's a lot of questioning around, why would I include semiotics, for example? And I think there's also a perception when there's a brief that obviously merits it, that actually it needs to go to big agency because they're the only ones that can manage that, whether it's multi-market or so on and so forth. Whereas I honestly think the reality is really different, that actually, for me, hopefully what we'll see in this study is mixed methodology studies really help reveal blind spots, things that you maybe didn't even anticipate before you start. They provide a wealth of data, which when you triangulate helps achieve real confidence in yourself and also with the client. They're super adaptable. If you get to stage 3 and you found something out and you need to change it, you can. So you're not sort of wedded to one approach and then not. And they're very easy to change when you've effectively sold in the dynamic nature of it. They can be really efficient. They don't have to be costly, particularly when you use independents. And I think independents are brilliant at mixed methodology studies because there are people at the top of their game with 20, 30, 40 years of experience, and they can all collaborate to do a brilliant study. So I genuinely think mixed methodology studies are awesome and actually should be more often part of briefs than they possibly are. Is it not changing here? I think one of the questions I often get asked is, oh, well, it's got to be a big project, but they're not just for big projects either. You know, you sort of think, well, actually, if you've got 6 pieces of a methodology, then it's going to be really costly. And it's only if it's a really massive change or lots of markets. And that's just not the case. So I tend to look at it more as, you know, the problem that needs to be solved and the need the client has and what they want to do with the outputs of the study. So mixed methodology studies for me are really good for holistic challenges, you know, for context, where they're very chewy, where actually you need, you know, a lot of confidence to move forward. Whereas targeted studies actually, are, you know, can be really good. A single methodology study could be really good for inspiration, for very specific problems, when actually other stages. So there's a lot of considerations, and I don't think really it has to be ruled out at all just because it's maybe a smaller budget or a smaller project. I'm just going to
what was the reaction of the client to your approach?
Well, I think the key for me is, as we go through it, is initially, often, and we'll come on to this, the brief will say, I want 10 IDIs to do an experience map, for example. The client will come that as part of the brief. They'll have got to that conclusion. So the first thing is purely to understand what they're really trying to do. And if that is the appropriate solution for their objective, then it's no problem. Whereas in this instance, it was really clear, as we'll come on to, there were so many more considerations that merited a more robust approach, a more detailed approach, that actually it was, I wouldn't say it was easy to sell in, but so long as everything meets the budget and the criteria, I think it's possible to sell in. And once you've done it once, then it becomes easy to sell in, because you've overdone that, you've gone over that hurdle of actually, why would you do this? And they've seen the benefit of it. So then it becomes, you know, actually easy to make the right calls later on. But that first time can be a bit tricky. And I think that's the point here, is that if I speak to the client on this particular project, they said it was quite surprising. They weren't expecting it to be so holistic, so transformational. And they said things like, actually, it just went way above just the right product solution. And it evaluated everything. And actually what that enabled them to do was to get the whole business to buy into it, the confidence in them to move forward. And I think the bit that I really appreciated or liked was this last bit that they said, we're very often guilty of thinking the product is a standalone thing, but in reality, we need everything to come together. And I think that's my point on the holistic versus targeted. Sometimes you get a brief where the client's thinking it's just a product, or it's just a claim, or it's just a brand, or whatever it may be. But actually, the context around it's really messy or complicated or difficult. And when that is the case, the mixed methodology study is wonderful for getting to the point where A, you understand with confidence, and B, the business has the confidence to act.
So how did the project come about?
So a little bit of background and context. This project, this is Ollie the Owl, this product was in sleep. And actually sleep deprivation, if there's any parents on the call, it is a massive issue for parents. And actually it's a massive issue in lots of ways, but actually the number one impact on a new parent's mental health will be lack of sleep. About 2/3 of new mums struggle with the baby sleep, i.e. they struggle with getting the baby to sleep and the challenges that have. And actually almost 9 out of 10 new mums will turn to products to help. So things like sleep aids and night lights and then things like that actually are designed to give the baby a better night's sleep and then them a better night's sleep. So the brief I got on that context was, it's a massive category. We need to play in there, and we do. And the client is the Mayborn Group, Tommy Tippy, and they had this lovely character called Ollie the Owl. Well, in fact, it was more than Ollie the Owl. He has friends. It's Ollie the Owl and friends. And he's a sleep aid, and he basically has a cry sensor in, and he soothes the baby to sleep. And so he's a lovely little character, but they had a bit of a perplexing challenge, because even though he looks very nice, even though when you look at Amazon reviews, he reviews really well, they were selling at a fraction of the other leading sleep aids. And it was really perplexing, because they tested all the commercials and they looked at everything. And so they just came to me saying, actually, we've got a problem and it needs fixing. And actually their initial brief, so starting right at the beginning, was around, actually we'd like to do some IDIs to map the experience map and find out at what point on the journey things are falling over, which seems like a really sensible brief. I guess that then leads into what I suggested back. So actually on the surface, I could have gone back and suggested that. I could have costed up IDIs and experience map, happy days, it would have met their needs perfectly. But in that initial briefing discussions, it was really clear that it was never going to be quite as easy as that. And actually, there were some considerations that shaped the design of the methodology we went to, which I'll show you in a second. I think that the key big things is that firstly, it's the brief behind the brief, the real problem versus the brief. The brief was super clear, but when you scratch below the surface and you talk to various people, actually, there was a real mixed appetite for change. The category was very dynamic and complex and changing. There were lots of questions that you could quite quickly have around what was going on that go beyond the product. And that was sort of quite easy to see. I think secondly, it was really obvious that parents wouldn't have all the answers. If I looked at these sleep aids, even if you did a really quick review on Amazon, they all rate really highly. The feedback was exceptional, not just for these, but the competitive set. It was really hard to pull them apart. So if we'd have just gone to parents, it would have been, my bet would have been they would have been relatively positive, and some of the things, the hypotheses and questions, they wouldn't have been able to answer because it was a well-performing product. I think also they've done a lot of work. So that's good and that's bad. That eliminated some ideas, commercial ideas. The challenge with that is that if I then had come up with contradictions to that, I knew already that I'd need a lot of evidence on that. And actually, would 10 mums, 20 mums saying this isn't right, would that be enough to change some of those ideas? And that sort of is the same with the stakeholder beliefs, that actually, in order to make any change, it would need a cross-functional support that goes across the business through their processes. And actually, there were lots, even in the very early discussions, there were lots of beliefs, a hypothesis about why it was wrong. And actually, when you've got that situation, it's not quite a case of just saying, well, mum says or parents say. You're going to need some confidence to act, particularly if you're going to invest money or you're going to make a commercial risk. And then I think the other challenge that always comes is on budget and time, is the budget and time had been costed in line with an IDI study and an experience map. So it was relatively limited. It wasn't really small. It was a decent sized budget, but it was not preparing itself for 6 stages versus 1. So what that meant for the design of the methodology or the approach that I'll show you is I knew I need a holistic approach. If I was going to build any confidence and make real change and impact, there were too many unknowns to be resolved just by speaking to parents. And I knew that I'd need some direct conversations and indirect conversations with parents, because I knew they wouldn't be able to tell me some of the things, because actually it's a great performing product. So I knew there'd probably be some blind spots there. I also like to use some other approaches that maybe look at the problem from a different perspective. And there's a couple of techniques with some AI and semiotics that I thought, knowing how complicated it would be, would just be brilliant at unpicking the problem, see a new side of the problem, but also help finding some answers. Because I think in this case, if I'm going to say this isn't right, this hypothesis you have isn't right, I need to almost then offer up and what would be right. So the semiotics in particular was really key for that. And I also knew that actually this is it was quite a high profile project. It was one that would require investment. So I would need data. And if it was going to be qualitative, I'd need to have triangulated enough data points and be able to with confidence say this is right, because I didn't plan to do a sort of a large quantitative study to validate at the end, for lots of reasons, because I didn't think it was right.
Before we go on to the study itself, is it possible to explain a bit more about the AI and the semiotics as to how it worked in practice?
Yes. Can I explain it, Luella, I've got a slide on each of those, and I was wondering,
Okay.
shall I explain there? But if it doesn't explain it, will you ask me again so I can I put it in there? And then I think everybody goes, oh gosh, if you're going to do all of that, how are you going to fit it in a limited budget and time? And it's all about scope. And I honestly think this is where independents are just awesome. And I say independents, but also smaller agencies that are really good value. There's some brilliant agencies that are really good value, but for the expertise with the independents, you can be very specific on the scope and say at this stage, this is what I need. And it turns into days or whatever it is. So actually, it's not like you're trying to do everything with that methodology every time. You're choosing the right element of it to keep the scope tight, to enable you to get the outcome you want, which I think is really important. Otherwise, you'd end up with, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of costs because you put in a full complet of every methodology. The approach I then got was actually quite extensive, simple. It's actually 6 steps, I think, over 3 phases. So I'll very quickly explain sort of the 3 layers of the approach and how it came about. But the first step was around building the hypothesis. So this was really directly addressing what the client had asked, the experience map. And it started with consumer and stakeholder interviews, and then it went into psychology and psychology AI analysis of reviews. But this was about mapping that journey and sort of having a stake in the ground for the rest of the project from a consumer perspective about what was going on. Now, if I'd stuck to the original brief, that's where we'd have stopped at the end of stage 1. And so you can hopefully see in a second how many additional stages and perspectives were able to come out of it. I'm going to talk about psychology and but Samantha was my partner, but we'll come on to that in a second. The second phase was around pinpointing the issues. Now, this was with Mums Views, who are a parent panel, a brilliant parent panel in the UK and the US. And this was just mini. So this was only 200 mums. So this wasn't a validation exercise. This wasn't a quant survey exercise. And it's not at the end. So for me, it was very much used qualitatively to basically pinpoint the issues, hone down all the hypotheses, decide where to focus. And I come on to it again later, but in itself, it added some unique perspectives that we could then delve into. But there's a very good reason why that was in the middle, is almost to narrow down some of those hypotheses. Before we then did two last phases of the qualitative research. The first was around digital in-home ethnography using Qualzy, which I know lots of people use as the digital partner, which is just an awesome adaptable platform for everything. And this is where we recruited 16 mums. We looked at their whole shopping journeys. We watched the babies. We did deprivation exercises. You know, thanks to Qualzy, you do concept tests. It was just a lovely way to really take the insights, the hypotheses to the next level, both through collaboration, through observation, through questioning. And then the final stage was a semiotic review. And it had to be quite tight, because that's where costs can explode if you're not careful. But I knew at the end, when we'd got all these hypotheses, that there's just some things that parents wouldn't be able to say. And it felt like, given so much of the product was around character and who and what the product is, that a semiotic review would probably be the only way to build confidence into the actions that come next. So there were three phases: this build the hypothesis, sort of pinpoint it, test it out, move it forward, and then really sort of collaboration with consumers before looking more culturally at the bigger picture. And the study ended with, I call it help make it work, because it wasn't really a debrief. I think this is the difference as well between taking the insights and embedding it in the business versus sort of finishing. This is the research project and gone. It was more like a strategic plan, and it was very simple. Again, I'll come on to some of the details, but a 4-stage plan that really was virtually aligned by that point, and actually then supported them to build it into the briefs for the various different teams in order to act on it. The key bit, I think, is the review and iterate in between. If we'd found out at the end of stage 2 something different, we could have changed the whole process if that had been required. And also the client was involved in all of those stages in terms of reviewing. So that was the overall methodology. I think, Luella, to answer your point, I've chosen 3 just very simple stages that I think were really key in unlocking the blind spots, because I think that's one of the best reasons to do a mixed methodology study, is to get all these perspectives. So I've chosen the 3 really simple things that sort of help do that. The first one, which is really obvious, I know everybody does, but I just think it's so underrated, is the stakeholder interviews, particularly in a project like this, where lots of functions are going to have to be responsible for creating change. You want to know where all the barriers are going to be at the end of that, so that all the work that you do isn't left blind. And a lot of the time, people can't necessarily tell you what their questions are, but you can unpick quite easily what they believe to be true, and you know what challenges they're going to have and what they're going to fight against, and so much. And actually, usually those things are very different in different departments. So I think the first bit that's really important was the stakeholder interviews, and not to underestimate actually or limit how many you do. Sometimes people go, can I do 10 stakeholder interviews? And I go, yes, because actually if there's 10 people that are going to be responsible for moving it forward, I want to know what they're going to know at the very beginning. So I try not to limit it, and I try to have really, really good conversations that sort of scratch below the what do you want, why is this important, to the what's going to stop this happening, and sort of what are you believing that I need to understand when I look through the lens of the consumer. The second one is the psychology AI, which is really neat. So Samanto is it's an AI company. It does lots and lots of things, but what they do have is an online platform, which is a self-serve platform. It's super affordable. I think it used to be less than 1,000 pounds for a project. They provide the data, but you can just choose it. So I could choose 10,000 reviews or however many reviews I want to do. It's instant, and you can totally see the data behind the data. So you can validate it, you can simplify it, you can change it. I think they've just introduced full text automation of the categorization and everything. So it's a really neat little tool. But the piece in this project that was really valuable was something called their emotional connection measure. When I saw the reviews were all the same, it's really hard. You can look at the topics and I can find out functionally what's different with all the products, but it's really hard to take more from it than that when you just have an AI that analyzes the topics or sums it up. Whereas the emotional connection is all about the language that is being used in the reviews. It gives you a measure of how emotionally connected the person writing the review, or the aggregate person writing the review, is to that brand or product. And what's brilliant is in an instant, it will tell you who's lacking and who's not. So whereas you could go in with 10 products that all have a 5-star rating, you'll come out with a differential. And it's a visual number as well, so it's very compelling. If it's just 2 percentage points difference, so what? If it's 30 percentage points difference, there's a massive difference in connection. And this was really helpful in this because it was a really quick, you can do it in a day, you can do it in an hour. It's a really quick measure that instantly showed me that the emotional connection of Ollie was significantly less than some of the competitors. So it gave me a reason going into the next stages to work out why. And when I went into the little survey, I could test out some comms. When I go into working with parents, I could explore what drives this and not. So it's not an essential piece in any study. It is an extra cost, but it's a really nice way of getting an instant piece of feedback on an area that's really important to brands around the emotional connection. So it's a really lovely tool if people haven't used it. It takes a bit of getting used to, but it is there, and you can do it on a one-off as well. You don't have to be signed up for every project that you do. And then the last bit that was really important to this was the semiotics. Semiotics are valuable probably in everything because it's just such a wonderful study, and I'm not skilled in it. So I work with independents who are. But what was really interesting is that this whole character is something that becomes so emotive and so debated and so opinionated. It's very hard to overcome it. If people say Ollie shouldn't be an owl, or if they say Ollie's not got a personality, it's very hard to argue just by asking parents. So when I look at sort of any measure through my questioning to parents on, does the character influence the decision? Any way, any conversation around that, it was less than 3% of parents on any of the characters, whether it was Ollie or other products, that said character was part of their decision or part of their love or anything like that. Whereas when you look at semiotics, that's just not true. The reality of how differently you engage with, say, the owl in the middle versus the Pixar owl versus the Disney, these are characterful things, and in Baby even more so. So the semiotics for me was a brilliant piece to then take it beyond we think we know where the problems are. What do you do about it? What's the truth? How should it look? How could it look? What if you do it in this way? What does that mean? How are consumers going to respond to it? So it was the real final piece of the pie to take all the insights and then to really, I guess, give really good direction on what Ollie should be, rather than not.
Is it possible to pick apart the reaction of the baby as opposed to the parent from all this?
Yes, so we did, I think we did 5 days in the digital in-home, and we had a part of that where we were observing the baby going down to sleep, observing the baby in sleep, and there was lots of this where it was around the size and the shape and how babies interacted differently with different sleep aids and how close they were to them. And so yes, there was lots in the earlier stage, there was lots of learnings we had from observing the rituals of going to bed. And there was a really nice piece we did on, I call it the deprivation exercise, but it's one of my favorite, where you swap their chosen products that they have for the opposite. And that was fascinating, because even with babies, you see a difference in how quickly they respond, how they, wake in the night. It's very interesting. So yes, there was definitely some observation there, but obviously they couldn't tell us what they wanted. But that was part of the final results, included all of that.
So how long did this take from start to finish?
So, good question. From when the brief was signed off, so not in building the methodology and having that debate, it was 5 weeks from start to finish, which I don't think's a long time. I think the key is ultimately having someone like myself in the middle who absolutely coordinates it and who owns the insight, sort of overlapping recruitment times as some of the other methodologies, so on and so forth. Also, this is in the scope, not being unrealistic of what you expect the partners to deliver. So if you're asking partners for 3 weeks of reports, it's going to take longer. If you're side by side with them as they're going through the journey and you're not asking for deep reports and you're consolidating the insights, then actually it's a lot faster. So I think that goes into the scope to keep it really timely, is what you're asking all of the people that are working with you to do. I won't go too much into this slide because we sort of have said quite a lot of it, but I think a lot of the time I get questioned, do you really need all of those stages? Is it the mixed methodology? Is it necessary? Well, I guess the only way I can answer that is by saying it was within budget and scope, and every stage of the process offered a unique perspective that I would not have got through the other methodologies. And for the stakeholder consumer interviews, it was critical for writing the hypothesis and the map at the very beginning. The AI showed me that lack of emotional connection, which basically provoked a whole host of new tests and questions in the other stages. That mini survey, not only did it show me where to focus, but actually it tested out some things. It showed me there was a significant overstatement of awareness for Ollie, much more than the competitors. So again, it raised loads of questions about why would that be and what does that mean? And these were unpicked as we went through. The in-home ethnography showed actually there was a massive preference for Ollie by all parents, even non-Ollie users, but they would have never brought him into the home. And so it's a really interesting thing as you sort of build it up. We would never have seen that through just talking to people, because usually when you say to people, would you have considered this? Or the answer is yes. But when you start to break it down, when you do the deprivation exercises, you start to unpick some of those things. And then honestly, the semiotic review, I think, was super powerful. I think if we'd just done it in itself, there would have been too many unknown questions around the consumer preferences and behaviors. But as the final piece, it really did those final answers of, so what do we do with all of this stuff? And what does that mean? And, notwithstanding, I mean, again, the strategic brief, it's more than a report. It bridged the gap between the insight to the recommendation action. It's sort of not just a one-off presentation that goes, and it shows the business how to interlink the insights into the briefs and the processes that they have. So I think all stages were important. And I think if I look at the strategic plan, I mean, I've just put it here. I think the key parts of the strategic plan, it was really simple. It was 4 areas. It was prioritized in time and in focus and in terms of impact. In this particular study, actually, the commercial and the comms priorities were even more important than any product changes. So all of that was discussed and debated. And I think the other thing that was really important, it doesn't just say, this is what consumers think, this is where the problem is, this is why it's a problem, but it has to go to, this is what from this whole methodology says you can do about it. And I think having that is the bit that enables them to act, because they're not then going, well, now what do we do about it? They're then debating of these things, what works for the business, what doesn't work, what, how does it work commercially? So I think it's not to underestimate that actually the only beginning bit works because it all comes together in sort of quite a collaborative plan. But I think because the client is available every step of the way, by the time it gets to this point, there were no surprises. And, a lot of the questions that they would have had have already come out through the iteration. So you're sort of in a really good place to answer everything and for it to be going. That doesn't mean it stops there. I remember even a few months after, they'd sort of come back and show me some of the design progress work and whether it was brief and working, and there'd be some course corrections, but generally it was a really good place to start without the need to then go do more work to progress.
Has the client indicated how, if at all, it would change their attitude towards qualitative research?
I think not so much specifically. So they've not said to me, oh, thanks to this, we sort of operate differently. But I definitely feel after this study, and actually there was some others before, so this wasn't the first one, but after this study, it's not that hard to sell, for want of a better word, a mixed methodology approach, because I'd only use it if it was relevant. And I think they trust that now, that says actually there's times, and also they're very open to, if there's a chewy problem, if the if the exec are going to be particularly challenging, that's a great time they're going to be asking for it as well. So I feel like actually they just really understand the benefit of it for them, because they've seen it in practice, and the collaborative nature. And actually they're quite good. This client's pretty good for like being open to new methodologies. If I said there's this sort of, they're pretty good. We've done a lot of different AI companies, a lot of different approaches with them that they've been really open for. I think even though the product wasn't the main change, and I sort of hasten to say this wasn't about changing Ollie, because actually those other things in the strategic approach here, arguably they were even more important and could be done faster than changing Ollie. It did come to the point where actually Ollie could be better. And so now this was done in 2021, and Ollie was launched, or he's in the middle of a soft launch. So he's literally only just come to market. But this is how he's changed. And this is what I guess the learnings did, is the sort of the semiotics in particular showed how to tap into sleep more, how to be more human-like. The sort of the quality in the work was about being better for baby, a bit smaller, fluffier, softer, in line with the newborn and how they were using it, and retaining the bits for parents that were just brilliant, because actually he was really good. So the functionality was really important to maintain, and that was always the risk. So that's the big thing that was thrown back, that says actually they need to make sure the functionality isn't lost, because Ollie's good. Ollie's not bad now. He just can be a bit more softer, cuter, personable, delivering in some of the other areas that are less tangible for parents and baby.
Looks much more cuddly.
He is more cuddly. He is. I mean, they're both lovely. They're both lovely, but he is more cuddly, and he's just more suitable for the occasion. And so, but as I say, I'm conscious to say it's not in isolation. You have to do the other parts of the pie, otherwise in itself a product won't change the world, and you can make the best product ever, but if they don't do all the pieces of the pie, it's not going to work. And yeah, so that was really the sort of whistle-stop tour of Ollie the Owl. And it's like, this was what the global head of product said, is that he was always good, and they knew he was always good, but they just knew he could be better because he wasn't selling or he wasn't optimized. And it's just the thoroughness. It actually gave them the confidence to act. So they didn't have to go through loads of other stages. It didn't get blocked in the innovation gateways. It sort of got them to the point they needed to be and get through the business.
Well, I'm sold. If I still had little people, I'd buy an Ollie.
I know. My youngest still has her, so.
No. Thank you very much, Steph, for that. Any questions, people? You stayed with us throughout, which is pretty darn good. Oh, yes, we do have a question. It's from Mark Hadfield, who says, when you say commercial, Steph, do you mean pricing? And did your research look at product pricing?
Commercials, everything, Mark. Pricing, availability, distribution, how it presents in Amazon, all the commercial levers that the team will have looked at. And that will have been part of the journey map. And did I look at pricing? Not in terms of quantitatively, but in terms of qualitatively. So how did he fit? Was he competitive? Did parents perceive him to be competitive or not? And how much of a barrier was that or not in their selection as such, but not quantitatively?
Will has asked, were there any other versions of methods that you considered using but didn't quite make the cut?
So that's a good question. For this one, not so much so. I think the bigger thing for this one was, should I do a quantitative bit at the end? Should it be more qualitative in the middle? What's the scope of the semiotics? It was more the cut of the methodology rather than which methodologies. I think also including things like the semanto. Before this study, it wasn't quite so obvious why that would be an extra piece, even though it's quite a small piece. And so that was probably something that I was worried might get cut, if that makes sense, as you go through, because it was harder to show. But now you can see it, then it's actually really easy to keep in. It's quite a small additional investment for a big return.
Simon, do you have any questions at all?
Not really. I just think it's a brilliant case study, and when we read it in the judging panel, and I should say it's when we do the judging, it's all unbranded, so we don't know who the researchers are and the agency, and it's very much a whole group of people looking very carefully at these, and it's a written, as everyone who's entered before knows, it's a written submission, and to hear it live is brilliant. And I agree, it looks much more cuddly.
You've got another question in from Ali, sorry Simon, who says, I'm interested in how you use the Mums Use platform. You said you used it in more of a qualitative way, and what you feel this element added to the process and overall insight.
So Mums Use isn't a platform. Mums Use is a panel, and it's a gentleman called Roger and Paul who run Mums Use. They have the largest panel in the UK and the US, and they are awesome. They are like having a mum expert independence by your side in a project. So in terms of from a mum project using them, it was A, used as an independent, B, access to their panel so we could reach 200 mums very quickly. And so it was a partner. It was basically talking to 200 mums on scale very quickly in a very affordable way, to hone and test and pressure test some of those things, and using their expertise to ask the questions in the right way. So for me, in this study, I use them very much as a qualitative, independent mum expert partner that allowed me to pressure test the first part of the study and answer some key things and take us on to the next stage. It was a perfect link to, I guess, deliver the focus that we needed.
I think this is a great example, if I could just say, that often qualitative researchers are have the image of working, on their own in a silo. And here Steph's working with a team of different people with different skills and so on, and that's good qualitative research, where you're really working together, and you get great insights like that. So I think it's a great example.
And I think, if I may, Simon, I think the time is now for independence. I feel like there is such a network of people who are so experienced and who aren't trying to create agencies and something, they are just trying to do brilliant work. And actually the brains, when you bring people in who are experts in semiotic, it cuts through things so quickly because they're so experienced that I just think now's the time. If never before you could do it, now you can.
We've got an anonymous who missed your semiotic partner.
So a semiotic partner was an independent called Salma, who's actually Swedish and has gone into another job. So I'm gutted because she worked brilliantly with me. So I do have a couple of others, but I haven't worked with them yet. So next semiotic study, I will be asking the same question back out.
If there are no more, then I think we will call this to a halt, and I can't see any more coming. So I am going to stop recording.